Welcome back to Annapolis. I'm Bruce DePoit. A special edition of News Talk for you this time as we're in Maryland's state capitol for the first day of the 2016 session of the Maryland General Assembly. Joining us now, two members of the Maryland State Senate. Michael Huff is a Republican from Frederick County, Rich Madaleno, a Democrat from Montgomery. It's great to have both of you here. Thanks very much for your time. Let's get right into it. There is an expectation that the Assembly's desire to keep spending levels high on the issues that you think the people care about most, that there will be some conflict between Governor Hogan's desire, which he believes voters were expressing particularly strong in the 2014 election, to get state spending under control and to provide as much tax relief as possible. Senator, where do you see those fights playing out in detail, in terms of where the rubber meets the road?
Well, thanks to the Obama recovery right now, the state has a $500 million surplus. I mean, we are in the position that we said we would be in the last election, a recovering economy, stronger revenues, enough revenue to meet our obligations. I don't think the governor right now, who never talked in the election about cutting education, cutting health care, cutting public safety, I don't think the governor wants to be out there saying we need to cut your child's educational opportunities in order to pay for minuscule tax relief or tax relief to the handful of people at the upper end. We have the money to pay our obligations now into the future. I heard you ask Mike Miller about the structural deficit. If you look 6 years from now, our deficit is a cumulative 0.5%. We are in a strong position and stronger we've been in 15 years.
Senator Huff.
Well, we have a one-time surplus this year, so it's important to remember that. We can't go spending a bunch of money for this year, next year, and further out when we have a one-time surplus. We can't go raid that. So there's going to be some natural push and pull. You have a Republican governor for the first time in a long time. We had 8 years of total Democrat control, and we saw the results of that. There was one-party rule, and it was more taxes, more spending constantly. So this governor is being very fiscally conservative with the budget and trying to provide tax relief, which the citizens of Maryland were very clear that they wanted after 8 years of out-of-control spending and taxes.
The tax relief, at least some of it, that he's proposed could have come from almost any governor of either party. I mean, when you talk about tax relief for retirees and tax relief for people making $53,000 or less, that is something that might sound particularly appealing to people who are struggling to make ends meet.
I know it's something as a state senator we hear all the time from retirees. Either they're leaving the state or they're struggling to stay here because of the way that we treat retirees as far as taxes compared to our surrounding states. And then the other thing he introduced was the earned income tax credit, which will help those on the lower end. So I think that's something that Democrats, Republicans, everybody should support. I know that's something that a number of Democrats have supported in the past. So that, and then also I hope that we touch on income taxes overall. The Senate President just brought that up, that Maryland has very high income taxes, and that's something that we also need to address.
Your thoughts on that, Senator Madaleno?
Well, I would just remind people that the efforts of the last few years, what has that bought the taxpayer of the state of Maryland? The #1 public education system, a far more affordable higher education system, 400,000 more people with health care, which means lower costs for insurance rates for the average person, less waiting time in hospitals, better public safety, lower crime rates. I mean, across the board, as the Senate President said, what we want to be up is up in the state of Maryland because of the hard decisions that were taken over the last several years in order to make sure we were positioned for the future. The governor is involved in a race to the bottom. I mean, if you want to position ourselves so that we're Alabama, then listen to Larry Hogan's plan. If you want to keep Maryland moving forward with our real competitors, with Northern Virginia, with Massachusetts, with New Jersey, New York, California, Minnesota, Wisconsin, those are states that value education, that put in that strong public investment. And that's what the governor is offering, is reduced public investment in things that people care about, and then reduced economic opportunity for the future. I don't think that's where we want to go.
Is there a reason to fear a race to the bottom, Senator?
No, I don't think so at all. I mean, we have a great state. We have a very educated workforce here. We have the port in Baltimore. We have a lot of things going on that other states don't have. But the one thing holding us back is our taxes. I mean, businesses aren't coming here because of the corporate tax. It's much easier to go to Virginia where the taxes are lower. And for individuals, I know I just paid in Maryland. I just did my taxes for my job outside of being a state senator. And I pay my taxes. And I told my wife, I said, if I wasn't a state senator, we could move with my job down to Florida, and I would have paid zero. And so instead of sending thousands of dollars to Maryland income taxes, I would have paid nothing in taxes. So we're not competitive. We have 49 other states that are competing against us. The last couple of years have been cutting their taxes, while Maryland alone has been raising tax after tax after tax, and we've seen the result. People have been leaving the state.
What is Frederick County's #1 legislative priority this year?
Well, Frederick County has a number of issues, of course, and we want to make sure that, first starting off, people want tax relief. That's the #1 issue in Frederick County with our voters, and the #1 issue across the state is taxes. This is the #1 thing I heard again and again from people. Don't raise my taxes. Help us out. We need some relief.
What is Montgomery County? I know you wanted to respond to something that Senator Huff said a second ago. I'll definitely give you that chance. But have you talked with the Executive Legate and the Council about what Montgomery County hopes to see or maybe not see if there's a status quo situation, what have you? What are Montgomery County's priorities for this session?
Well, Montgomery County's priorities are not to have Governor Hogan continue to target us for reductions because we happen to be one of the jurisdictions that didn't vote for him. Our school children shouldn't pay the price for the fact that the adults in the community didn't vote for him. Our #1 priority is always going to be education, followed by infrastructure, transportation. We're going to be down here fighting to make sure that education is adequately funded, that we are positioned for the future. What makes Montgomery County and a place like Frederick County so attractive for people? Great education, superior infrastructure, which leads to the type of high-wage, high-tech economic growth. Makes it expensive to live there, but the job that probably Mike was talking about, he's not going to find in Florida. Governor Hogan yesterday in his press conference said, we're killing Virginia with job growth right now. Everyone knows the tax differences between the two states, when in fact they're not that great because property taxes are much higher in Virginia and you still pay things like a car tax in Virginia, believe it or not. So we're still well positioned to attract the type of people and keep the type of people that keep Maryland strong.
What sort of approach does Governor Hogan take when he knows that the numbers are stacked against him downstairs, Democrats enjoying great advantage in both the House of Delegates and the state Senate? How does he craft an agenda that can be successful, knowing some of the reality on the ground?
Well, I think the governor has a lot of power when it comes to the budget. So Maryland's governor is one of the most powerful in the country as far as the budget goes. So obviously he has a lot of say on that. I think the tax cuts he put in are very reasonable, bipartisan. And this year I'm very hopeful, actually. We did a lot of work in the interim. The Senate President, the Speaker, and the governor all signed off on our initial report for criminal justice reform. I think that's going to be a huge thing. Heroin is a huge problem. I know in Frederick County, across the state, it's a problem. And we're looking at a bill that would provide thousands of treatment beds for people with heroin addictions and other things like that. I think that's something, there are a number of initiatives that we can do where I think we can have bipartisan support.
Heroin sounds like one of those, really sort of extreme drugs, and yet it is not a problem that exists over there. This is something that seemingly law enforcement everywhere is grappling with.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, this is much different than, let's say, the crack epidemic we had in the 80s and things like that, where it was really just hitting the inner cities. This is hitting everybody, upper class, lower class, middle class, small towns, big cities. Everyone is being affected by this, and I think it's opening everyone's eyes to seeing that. We need to look at drugs in a different way than we have in the past with these people with possession and things like that offenses. We need to get them into treatment, and that spending $40,000 a year to incarcerate them when we can get them in treatment for much less is a better solution. And I think that's something you're going to see this session that hopefully will have, I think, support strongly from Republicans and Democrats.
Is that something leaders in your county are talking about, Rich?
Absolutely, but the irony, of course, getting people into treatment means actually spending more money. To do it right means spending more money. Now, when it's an issue that is impacting the rural parts of the state, the governor is willing to be engaged. I mean, the difference, interestingly, is if this was an issue just hitting the inner cities, people like the governor and some of his colleagues would be running from this issue because it's impacting all parts of the state. They're talking about it. It's going to require an investment of money in both public safety and in treatment services in order to fight this epidemic, which is hitting the entire country.
Could you talk briefly, I only have a couple seconds left, about the criminal justice reform discussion that might begin here?
Well, I think Mike hit it on the nail. I think this is one where there is broad bipartisan support because if you do it right, you divert people into the right treatment, into the right sentences, and you actually save taxpayers money, and hopefully you reduce recidivism going out. So it's a short-term win and a long-term big win if we can do it right, and I'm glad everyone is on board with it. because that's a huge sea change from where you used to be, fighting. We got to be hard on crime. Now we have to be smart on crime, smart on offenders, so that we're best positioned to save money and protect the citizens.
State Senator Rich Madaleno is a Democrat from Montgomery County. State Senator Michael Huff is a Republican from Frederick. Thank you both for coming out, being in the cold on what is the beginning of a very busy time here in Annapolis as you all begin your 90-day session. Thanks again for your time.
Happy New Year.
Yeah, thank you.
Great having both of you here. We'll step aside for a moment. We're back, though, with more News Talk on News Channel 8 right after this.